Thank you so much for having me. I'm here today because I believe in our collective potential to create a more peaceful, inclusive, and sustainable world. And that's why I accepted this invitation. In the spirit of activating different parts of your brain, I'd invite you all to stand up and indulge me in a small exercise. That previous talk was quite stimulating, and to be the third in a row, I'd like to ask you all a question and to buzz with the people near you and to share your answer on this question, which is part of the sort of introduction that was written in the program for my talk. So if young people were actively engaged in all aspects of society, if young people thought of themselves as community leaders, as role models, as mentors, as stakeholders, how would the world change? So I'm going to give you about a minute to just reflect on this question. This is the question that keeps me up at night and wakes me up bright and early in the morning. So if you can just share some thoughts and reactions on this question with your neighbor, that would be great. Go ahead. So who's willing to share a little bit of what you discussed with your partner? Maybe I have time for two or three comments. All right, first, less hierarchical. Okay, thank you. A couple others, just shoot it out. Yeah. Less risk averse. Great. Anything else? More idealistic. Great. Perhaps more empathetic, more authentic. Anything else in the back? Well, thank you for indulging in my question. My story starts back when I was a teenager, many moons ago. I was expected to do mandatory community service hours, as we are for those of us who are, growing up in Ontario to get your high school credits, and I wasn't sure where I would volunteer my time to get these credits. And my mom encouraged me to take a look at the different places that I enjoyed going to as a kid. And so I applied to a few different places and got in. One was the McMichael Canadian Art Collection. And so there I was. I got in. I had written a whole application, and I was supporting an arts and crafts station during the holidays. And after 2 days, they were so impressed with how enthusiastic I was with all the young kids that I ended up getting a job offer and to work every Sunday for about 4 months to support a print screen artist. And it was just an amazing experience for me because to have started off with a volunteer effort, raked up a whole ton of hours for my official credit, to get this job offer, my confidence boosted. And I also realized how important it was that this particular art gallery, connected to parts of history with a group of 7 being buried there and having created artwork that was really iconic for who we are as Canadians and how we understand ourselves and our relationship with the land. Also, the artwork that I was exposed to in this gallery literally encouraged me to create more art and to encourage myself to understand the world through art and through expression. And so it was just amazing through this one volunteer opportunity, all of these triggers for the self-discovery that followed. It was in 1997 I was hired because of, some of this experience that I had on my resume and some of this art that I had in a portfolio that I got hired to be a graphic designer. So I was 17, 1997, so it was a while back. And it was a summer jobs program supported by our Canadian government based out of York University, and I was hired to be a graphic designer, and part of it was to learn on the job. And through this experience, I was very fortunate to meet who many of you may know is best-selling author Don Tapscott. And in 97, he launched a book called Growing Up Digital, The Rise of the Net Generation. And this is where I realized that I, having been born in 1980, was sort of the elder years of this generation growing up with technology, sort of growing up digital. And without knowing a world without technology, sort of bathed in bits, as Don would say, I realized that this generation I was part of had incredible power to change the world. Yet, is this generation aware of the power that they have? And I really questioned that. I really wasn't sure. Around the time of 99 with the dot-com boom, I was also wondering whether or not all of the talent, the technical talent driving innovation on the web was actually being harnessed in the best ways. And I was rollerblading at a time, so it wasn't in the shower, but it was while I was rollerblading with a friend who started a dot-com himself and sold it at the age of 16. So he was one of those whiz kids that people read about back in the day, Michael Furtick. And we actually came up with this idea called Taking It Global. And the whole premise of it was that if young people were actively engaged, we would actually put an end to the world's greatest problems. We really believed that we would end unemployment because looking back to some of the experiences of just being engaged and involved creates credentials and creates that sense of competency and builds your portfolio. We would put an end to poverty because of that feeling of building on your assets and being excited about the world, having the energy to contribute to society. We would reduce high school dropout rates because if all students were engaged, they would care to learn and they would want to be there. We would put an end to sexually transmitted diseases because people would be making informed choices about how they relate to one another. Put an end to war because we would form friendships. You know, people would form friendships with others, and an end to isolation and suicide rates, an end to racism and discrimination. And so this was the ideal. We set out on this quest to create a world where young people were actively engaged in all aspects of society. And what we tried to do was start with youth themselves. So leverage the power of social technology for social change, starting with young people. So back in 1999, we had this idea, and we launched TakingITGlobal, or tigweb.org, in 2000. And the premise of it was to engage youth. So how do we define engaged youth? Inspired, informed, and involved. So any experience that would allow people to have that sense of awareness, to be excited, to do something, that motivation, that drive, that's where sort of the inspiration part of it. So how could we do that? To be informed, you know, to have knowledge, to pursue knowledge, to have access to information. So that was sort of that component. And to be involved, whether it be through volunteerism or being able to do something, attending an event, interacting with political leaders. There's such a spectrum of ways on all these different levels. And so over the past, well, more than 12 years, we've literally designed and delivered a whole range of programs to inspire, inform, and involve youth. Our online community is now available in over 13 languages, completely volunteer translated. We've reached over 20 million unique visitors. We have over 400,000 members. Our Toronto-based office also has, well, with 20 staff and 15 interns every 4 months that come from many different disciplines to help work on different aspects of the site and also different projects that we run. And we have people based in regions all around the world, in hundreds of countries. We have a volunteer and online internship program. And this youth-to-youth community is actively engaging and inspiring, informing, and involving youth. We think about this model. We've created stories. People are inspired by the stories of their peers. That's what we found to be the most powerful. You don't create inspiration through telling people, but to share who you are, where you've come from, what have been your greatest struggles, how have you overcome them. So it's a space for storytelling. And we just love sharing stories within our site. We also have databases of resources where people can find out where you might be able to volunteer, or a whole hub on global issues. And we've partnered with many nonprofit organizations that produce policy papers or reports or research so that we're provoking curiosity and then having a place for follow-up knowledge that can be gained. And of course, there's a whole set of ways that we help people become more active in existing projects or through starting their own initiatives. And it's been a pretty amazing experience. We've done different impact sort of studies or different methods of evaluation. In a 2010 study, we surveyed our network with over 3,000 respondents. We were able to get a sense of how we are creating a sort of impact on people's lives. 89% have increased their awareness of different cultures as a result of TIG. So they're not just going on our site and adding their friends and connecting with people that they already know, but they're actively getting to know people that they would not normally interact with. And so that's changing their perception of the world, and externally, but also internally, creating a lot more self-reflection. 88% feel that they've increased their sense of awareness of opportunities and resources that are out there, and also we've seen an increase in the perception of youth to be able to create a change in the world. And 66% say that they've increased their volunteer activity directly as a result of being part of our community. They're seeing what other people are doing, and then they're going out and they're getting more involved as volunteers. And so they're increasing the number of hours that they're spending with other groups. And 1 in 2 have formed friendships. So this idea of forming friendships with those from other parts of the world is amazing. And it's actually very rewarding for me to be able to help stimulate this community and nurture it. But there was a day that I became quite depressed, actually, about what it is that we were trying to do. Partially because I realized some of the limitations that go along with trying to create change in the world. And that relates to what your theory of change actually is. So it was in December of 2009, and there I was in Copenhagen at the UN Climate Change Negotiation Conference. And our organization had accredited over 150 young people. And I realized I was, wearing this civil society badge. And as we went on the subway or the metro to sessions, people would relate to one another based on their badge. So the pink badge being the government badge, they sort of would talk to each other or not, and there was politics, with that. And then you have, business badge and all these different badges. And I asked myself, wow, I've been dedicating my life to creating these engagement experiences for young people. We've literally reached hundreds and thousands of youth and transformed a lot of lives, but with the 6+ billion people on the planet, how big of a change are we actually making in the world? And even in this process, we spent collectively thousands of hours working to ensure that it would result in more sustainable commitments from governments, and would our efforts actually result in anything concrete? And so there was this dinner plan that I had set that got canceled, and I asked myself, well, what should I do? Should I go for the civil society dinner? I was actually also invited to another very formal dinner with heads of different energy companies, and where do I go for dinner? As in, who are the people that I should associate with, and how does that reflect my theory of change? And I just couldn't go anywhere. So I sat there and I wrote this poem. I'm going to share the poem with you because it not only led to a series of words scribbled on sheets of napkins and backs of little postcards that I had collected from the conference center, but this was the year that I was 29 going on 30 and having an existential crisis about whether or not this deep-rooted commitment to engaging young people still held true. So lots of questions. I know I meant to delight you, but okay, so how does change happen? This is the name of the poem. How does change happen? This is perhaps one of those eternal questions that carries both simplicity and depth of complexity, juxtaposed in a tension so bright and dark that emotions explode and identities blur. Is your belief defined by your role? Or is your role defined by your belief? Is your belief defined by your role, or is your role defined by your belief? How does change happen? Policy, says the policymaker. Markets, says the business manager. Mass mobilization, says the organizer. Dialogue, says the convener. Systems change, says the academic. Imagination, says the artist. Invention, says the scientist. Innovation, says the technologist. Investment, says the banker. Design, says the architect. Enlightenment, says the spiritual guide. Rule of law, says the lawyer. Conviction, says the leader. Education, says the teacher. Data, says the analyst. Universal access, says the philanthropist. Healthy choices, says the coach. Awareness, says the communicator. Perspective, says the author. Crisis, says the journalist. Action, says the entrepreneur. Revolution, says the activist. Hope, says the dreamer. Network, says the connector. Inspiration, says the storyteller. Love, says the mother. Aspiration, says the father. Laughter, says the child. Possibility, says the youth. Reflection, says the elder. And so we ask ourselves where we stand, where we shine, and where we fly. We ask whether or not we are defined by the roles we take or the collective outcomes that emerge when our efforts and our beliefs collide. Is it magic or tragic that we disagree? Thank you. So since then, I became a mom, and it's fantastic. What I've also learned is that my commitment to engaging with youth hasn't diminished. In fact, it's heightened. And the evolution of my passion has gone from focusing on youth to youth in a sort of youth to youth setting to how do we create longer term systemic and structural changes so that every institution is able to engage youth more meaningfully in all aspects. And as a new mom, he's 5.5 months, John Paul, my son, I've really started to think a lot more deeply about children and also maternal health. I mean, it's just interesting because you think you have one role, but actually I realized even through that poem and through the act of creating those 30 acrylic paintings, the process of just sitting there and reflecting on those modes of thought, well, I guess maybe the poem says it all, the collision, and I guess I am an optimist, so there's some elements of magic to it, even though there are certainly days where I do feel that the world could be a tragedy, and I just can't let that happen. This is just a model of our theory of change as an organization, and this concept of starting with the individual, then moving to the networks, and then shifting from, let's say, youth networks to partnerships across social movements and affecting mainstream policy change. So thank you so much for having me here to hopefully delight you today.
Take a question?
You can take one.
Jennifer, on behalf of all of us, that was remarkable. Thank you so much. Matt, I think you had a question. Do you want to stand up to the microphone? And we have time for one or two questions, if anybody would like to ask.
Really fantastic presentation. Thank you. But a question so you started this when you were, so you're 32 right now.
I'm 32.
Right?
Yep.
You know, the best compliment I think any of us can get is that when we're told we act youthful. I love that when somebody tells me that, you know, contemporary thinking. But I read recently that 32 is the age that cynicism really sets in. And by the way, it goes the wrong direction. It usually it pervades us. But I think my question is how you maintain within your organization that attitude. And great quote, a great Canadian, Peter Jennings, I was a big fan, said, "Spend your youth defining your values, spend your life defending them." And I think the key is how do we transition from attitudes of youth to actions of the masses?
Yeah.
Curious your perspective on that.
No, thank you for that both reflection and question. It's interesting because I used to say that my aim is to feel youthful for the rest of my life. And more recently, spending time with my grandfather, who's, I'm fortunate enough, when any grandparent is alive and in their 90s, it's really quite a privilege. And I've actually been spending time saying I want to grow old. And I want to embrace, I think, the paradox of the young and the old, and not to have this perception that growing old suddenly makes me irrelevant and and just to be healthy. But I understand now, and there's some days where I wake up and I'm like, oh, they warned me about this. Like, this is awful. And I would say institutionally. Anyways, I won't spill out all the stories of stress, but what I can say is that intergenerational is definitely the way to go, and to remain youthful is to be surrounded by children and by youth, and our organization is certainly very young. And also, as I've been able to expand my professional expertise, I've been able to attract such talent, whether it be on our board or advisors. And so I embrace, there's someone who's a former director from UNESCO who I just met with, and he is basically in the years of retirement. He has such an active mind, so many experiences, and he's accepted the honor of being an advisor to us. And so it's actually, in the heart of it, it's about intergenerational dialogue, intergenerational partnership. Because then you can kind of get the best of all ages, and then we can think and create solutions for all of us, and not just to serve one particular demographic. So I think that would be my reflection. Thank you. All right.